Mrs. Corney, ma'am, I mean to say this, ma'am, that any cat or kitting that could live with you and not be fond of its home must be a ass, ma'am.
Oh, Mr. Bumble.
It's a no use disguising facts, ma'am,
said Mr. Bumble, slowly flourishing his teaspoon with a kind of amorous dignity which made him doubly impressive.
I would drown it myself with pleasure.
Then you're a cruel man, and a very hard-hearted man besides.
Hard-hearted, Mrs. Corney? Hard?
Mr. Bumble relinquished his cup without another word, squeezed Mrs. Corney's little finger as she took it, and inflicting 2 open-handed slabs upon his laced waistcoat, gave a mighty sigh, and hitched his chair a very little morsel farther from the fire. It was a round table. Consequently, Mr. Bumble, moving his chair by little, and little, soon began to diminish the distance between himself and the matron, and continuing to travel round the outer edge of the circle, brought his chair in time close to that in which the matron was seated. Indeed, the 2 chairs touched. And when they did do, Mr. Bumble stopped.
Hard-hearted, Mrs. Corney? Are you hard-hearted? Mrs. Corney?
Dear me, what a very curious question from a single man. What can you want to know for, Mr. Bumble?
Mr. Bumble drank his tea down to the last drop, finished a piece of toast, whisked the crumbs from his knees, wiped his lips, and deliberately kissed the matron.
Oh, Mr. Bumble, I shall scream. I'm only a foolish, excitable, weak creature.
Not weak, ma'am. Are you a weak creature, Mrs. Corney?
We're all weak creatures, Mr. Bumble.
So we are.
Nothing was said on either side for a moment or two afterwards.
This is a very comfortable room, ma'am. Another room, and this, ma'am, would be a complete thing.
Then it would be too much for one.
But not for 2. Eh, Mrs. Corney? The board allows you coals, don't they, Mrs. Corney?
And candles.
Coals, candles, and a house rent-free? Oh, Mrs. Corney. Oh, what an angel you are.
The lady was not proof against this burst of feeling and sank into Mr. Bumble's arms. That gentleman, in his agitation, imprinted a passionate kiss upon her chaste nose.
Such parochial perfection. You know that Mr. Slout is worse tonight, my fascinator.
Yes.
He is the master of this establishment. His death will cause a vacancy. That vacancy must be filled up. Oh, Mrs. Corney, what a prospect this opens. what an opportunity for a joining of hearts and housekeepings. The little word, eh? The one little word, my blessed Corney.
Yes!
I love doing that. Sexual greed and economic greed in the same scene. One of the most terrifying fates which could await a respectable Victorian woman was to remain unmarried, to be a spinster. Dickens certainly thought so. His description of Rosa Dartle: I concluded in my own mind that she was about 30 years of age and wished to be married. She was a little dilapidated, like a house with having been so long to let. And Miss Nag, who still aimed at youth, though she had shot beyond it years ago. And Miss Lucretia Tox, a long, lean figure, wearing such a faded air that she seemed not to have been made in what linen drapers call fast colours originally. Miss Tox had great experience in hackney cabs, and her starting in one was generally a work of time, as she was systematic in the preparatory arrangements. Have the goodness, if you please, Towlinson, to carry out a pen and ink and take his number legibly.
Yes, miss.
I'll trouble you also, Towlinson, with this card and this shilling. He's to drive to the card and is to understand that he will not on any account have more than the shilling.
No, miss.
And I am sorry to give you this trouble, Towlinson.
Not at all, miss.
Mention to the man, then, if you please, Towlinson, that the lady's uncle is a magistrate, and that if he gives her any of his impertinence, he will be punished terribly. You can pretend to say this in a friendly way, Towlinson. And because you know it was done to another man who died.
Oh, dear.
As you probably know, most of Dickens' novels were first published in serial form in monthly installments. And in one episode of David Copperfield, he introduced an extraordinary character. Her name is Miss Mowcher, and she's a dwarf manicurist and hairdresser. She's based on a real diminutive chiropodist called Mrs. Seymour Hill, whom Dickens had met when she'd attended his wife, Catherine.
What, my flower? You're there, are you, you naughty boy? Fie for shame. What you do so far away from home? Up to mischief, I'll be bound. Oh, you're a downy fellow, Steerforth, so you are. And I'm another, and I... Oh, you'd have betted £100 a five now that you wouldn't have seen me here, wouldn't you? Bless you, man alive, I'm everywhere. I'm here and there and where not, like the conjurer's half-crown in the lady's handkerchief. Talking of ladies and talking of handkerchiefs, what a comfort you are to your blessed mother, aren't you, my dear boy? over one of my shoulders, and I don't say which. oh, my stars and what's the names? Oh, I'm of too full a habit, Steerforth, and that's a fact. After a flight of stairs, it gives me as much trouble to draw every breath I want as if it was a bucket of water. If you saw me looking out of an upper window, you'd think I was a fine woman, wouldn't you? Oh, very happy to make your acquaintance, Master Copperfield, I'm sure. Face like a peach, quite tempting. I'm very fond of peaches. What a world of gammon and spinach it is, though, isn't it? Look here. Scraps of the Russian prince's nails. I keeps his nails in order for him twice a week, fingers and toes. The prince's nails do more for me in private families of the genteel sort than all my talents put together. I always carry them around. They're the best introduction. If Miss Mowcher cuts the prince's nails, she must be all right. I'll give them to the young ladies. They put them in albums, I believe. Now, Steerforth, this is not business. Let's explore the polar regions, and have it over. If either of you saw my ankles, say so, and I'll go home and destroy myself. Very well, then, I'll consent to live. Now, ducky, 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 come to Mrs. Bond and be killed. If Master Copperfield would take the chair, I'll operate on him too. And dirt cheap, my chicken. And I'm volatile, Master Copperfield. Now, I know I'm going to break your hearts, but I'm forced to leave you. You must call up all your fortitude and try to bear it. Goodbye, Master Copperfield. Farewell, Jockey of Norfolk. Bob swore, as the Englishman said, for good night when he first learnt French and thought it so much like English. Bob swore, me ducks, and I'm volatile.
When the original Miss Mowcher, Mrs. Seymour Hill, read that chapter of David Copperfield, she was mortified. She wrote angrily to Dickens, "All know you have drawn my portrait. I admit it, but the vulgar slang of language I deny." Dickens had not meant to hurt her, and for once his compassion overcame his writer's instinct. He replied to her lawyer, apologizing and offering to alter the whole design of the character. He did. And the next time Miss Mowcher appears in the novel, she's a completely different person. Utterly saintly and very boring, so I shan't do her. A woman's portrait that is startling in its modernity is the lesbian Miss Wade from Little Dorrit, making no apologies for anything. The history of a self-tormentor. I have the misfortune of not being a fool. From a very early age, I have detected what those about me thought they hid from me. My childhood was passed with a grandmother. That is to say, with a lady who took that title on herself. She had no claim to it. She had some children of her own family in the house and some children of other people. All girls, 10 in number, including me. We all lived together and were educated together. I must have been about 12 years old when I began to realize how determinedly those girls patronized me. One of them was my chosen friend. I loved that stupid mite in a passionate way that she could no more deserve than I can remember without feeling ashamed of, though I was but a child. She had what they call an amiable temper, an affectionate temper. She could distribute, and did distribute, pretty looks and smiles to every one among them. I believe there was not a person in the place except myself who knew that she did it purposely to wound and gall me. Nevertheless, I so loved that unworthy girl that my life was made stormy by my fondness for her. I loved her faithfully, and one time I went home with her for the holidays. She was worse at home than she had been at school. She had a crowd of cousins and acquaintances, and we had dances at her house and went to dances at other houses, and both at home and out. She tormented my love beyond endurance. Her plan was to make them fond of her, and so drive me wild with jealousy. When we were alone in our bedroom at night, I would reproach her with my perfect knowledge of her baseness, and she would cry and say I was cruel, and I would hold her in my arms till morning, loving her as much as ever, and often feeling as if rather than suffer so, I could still so hold her in my arms and plunge to the bottom of a river, where I would still hold her after we both were dead. You see, he's such an extraordinary writer because he can create a character like that with such power and truth and understanding, I think, and yet at the same time be such a chauvinist that if he hadn't made us laugh so much when we were researching for this, he'd have made us very angry. For example, this is his portrait of a perfect wife, Mrs. Chirrup, from Scenes for Young Couples. Mrs. Chirrup is the prettiest of all little women and has the prettiest little figure conceivable. She has the neatest little foot and the softest little voice and the gentlest little smile and the tidiest little curls and the brightest little eyes, and is in short altogether one of the most engaging of all little women, dead or alive. She's a condensation of all the domestic virtues, a pocket edition of the young man's best companion. A little woman at a very high pressure, with an amazing quantity of goodness and usefulness in an exceedingly small space. But if there be one branch of housekeeping at which she excels, it is in the important one of carving. Charles Dickens married Catherine Hogarth in 1836, and the most extraordinary thing about the marriage is its ending. A friend, Henry Morley, described her. Dickens has evidently made a comfortable choice. Mrs. Dickens is stout, with a round, rather pretty, very pleasant face, and ringlets on either side of it. One sees in 5 minutes that she loves her husband and her children, and has a warm heart for anyone who won't be satirical, but will meet her on her own good-natured footing. Well, the years went by, and the children kept coming. 12 births in 16 years. Catherine grew older and stouter and clumsier. Dickens wrote, "Catherine is as near being a donkey as one of her sex can be." And Harriet Martineau commented after a visit to them, "Dickens has terrified and depressed her into a dull condition, and she never was very clever." Now, one of Dickens' abiding enthusiasms was the theatre. In fact, as a young man, if he hadn't had a cold on the morning of his audition at Drury Lane Theatre, he would have become a professional actor. And all his life he adored putting on plays and acting in them. In 1856, he produced, directed, and starred in his friend Wilkie Collins' melodrama, The Frozen Deep, and he used his 2 daughters in the female roles. But the following year, when he wanted to recreate the production in Manchester, he decided to use professional actresses instead. He was introduced to and engaged 2 sisters, Maria Ternan and her younger sister, Ellen. Ellen was a young, slender, beautiful little thing, and he fell hopelessly in love with her. He was 45 years old, and she was 17. He bought her a bracelet as a present, but it was delivered by mistake to his wife, Catherine. One day, their daughter Kate came into Mrs. Dickens' bedroom and found her tying on her bonnet with tears pouring down her face. "Your father insists that I call on Ellen Ternan," she said. "You shall not go," said Kate. But she did. You see, Dickens' most passionate relationship was always with his public, and he was terrified of losing their affections. He was determined to devise an acceptable situation. So he suggested to Catherine that she should go and live at Gad's Hill, their country house, while he stayed in London, and only come to London when he went to the country. Catherine refused. Then he suggested that she should go and live in France while he stayed in England. Catherine refused. Finally, and most bizarre of all, he suggested to Catherine that she should keep to the upstairs rooms of their house at Tavistock Street and only come downstairs when they were entertaining visitors. He got rid of Catherine, but he retained her sister, Georgina, Mary's replacement, who'd come to live with her when she was 15, and she never left. She stayed in Dickens' house, looking after Dickens and her sister's children, until he died. In fact, he died in Georgina's arms, and she is the principal beneficiary in his will. They were never lovers, I don't think that, but he had a very strange affinity for his sisters-in-law. Further to retain that precious affection of his public's, he published a letter on the front page of his own magazine, Household Words, and in the Times and the Morning Post, and later in the New York Tribune, a letter to the public in which he said that he and his wife had lived unhappily together for many years, that she had been a bad mother and had lost the affections of her children, and that she was of unsound mind. Catherine never responded to these calumnies. He wanted to publish that letter also in Punch, the foremost comic magazine of the day, and was furious when the editor, his friend Mark Lemon, refused because he didn't think it was very funny. Dickens did not speak to him again for 12 years. So finally, a separation settlement was drawn up. Dickens gave Catherine £600 a year, her own house, number 70 Gloucester Crescent, her own carriage, and one of her 9 surviving children. He sent the eldest, Charles, to live with her. At the time that they left, her youngest child, Edward, known as Plawn, was only 6 years old. So the carriage bearing Catherine and Charles rolled away for its long stay at Gloucester Crescent. She lived there for 22 years. From the day that she left, she never saw Dickens again. She only saw her 2 daughters when they came for their music lessons to the house opposite. Catherine would stand in the upstairs window, looking through the lace curtains, waiting for her daughters to turn and wave at her as they went inside. But they never did. They were reconciled only after Dickens had died, and Kate was with her mother when Catherine was dying. Catherine handed her daughter a little bundle of letters tied up in blue ribbon. They were Charles Dickens' first letters to her. She said, "Give these to the British Museum, that the world may know he loved me once." Catherine is buried in Highgate Cemetery next to her baby daughter Dora. Ellen Ternan married a clergyman and lived on till 1914. By an extraordinary coincidence, she's buried in Southsea in the same graveyard as Dickens' other great love, Maria Beadnell, Mrs. Henry Winter. But Maria lies in an unmarked pauper's grave. At the time of the separation, Dickens was writing Little Dorrit. So, the bride had mounted into her handsome chariot, and after rolling for a few minutes smoothly over a fair pavement, had begun to jolt through a slough of despond, and through a long, long avenue of wrack and ruin. Other nuptial carriages are said to have gone the same road before and since. In an armchair, with an elbow resting on the table and her head leaning on that hand, sat the strangest lady I have ever seen or shall ever see. She was dressed in rich materials, satins and lace and silks, all of white. Her shoes were white, and she had a long white veil and bridal flowers in her hair. But her hair was white. She had not quite finished dressing, for she had but one shoe on. The other was on the table near her hand. I saw that everything within my view which ought to be white had been white long ago, and had lost its luster and was faded and yellow. I saw that the dress had been put upon the rounded figure of a young woman, and that the figure upon which it now hung loose had shrunk to skin and bone. "Who is it?" "Pip, Ma'am." "Pip?" "Mr. Pumblechook's boy, Ma'am. Come to play." "Come nearer. Let me look at you. Come close." When I stood before her, avoiding her eyes, I took note of the surrounding objects in detail. I saw that her watch had stopped at 20 minutes to 9, and that a clock in the room had stopped at 20 minutes to 9. "Look at me." "You are not afraid to look at a woman who has not seen the sun since you were born. Do you know what I touch here?" "Yes, Ma'am." "What do I touch?" "Your heart,
Mum. Broken. I'm tired, and I have done with men and women. I have sick fancies, and I have a sick fancy I should like to see some play. There, play. Play? Play. Call Estella at the door. You can do that. To stand in the dark, in a mysterious passage of an unknown house, bawling, "Estella!" to a young lady neither visible nor responsive, and feeling it a dreadful liberty so as to roar out her name, was almost as bad as playing to order. But Estella answered at last, and her light came along the dark passage like a star. Miss Havisham beckoned her to come close, and took up a jewel from the table, and tried its effect upon her fair young bosom and her pretty brown hair. "Let me see you play at cards with this boy."
"With this boy? Why, he's nothing but a common labouring boy."
"Well, you can break his heart."
"What do you play, boy?"
"Nothing but beggar my neighbour, miss."
"Beggar him," said Miss Havisham to Estella. So we sat down to cards. I played the game to an end with Estella, and she beggared me. Then, Estella being gone, and we two left alone, Miss Havisham turned to me and said in a whisper,
"Is she beautiful, graceful, well grown? Do you admire her? Love her, love her, love her. If she favors you, love her. If she wounds you, love her. If she tears your heart to pieces, and as it grows older and stronger, it will tear deeper. Love her, love her, love her. Hear me, Pip. I adopted her to be loved. I bred her and educated her to be loved. I developed her into what she is, that she might be loved. Love her. I'll tell you what real love is. It is blind devotion, unquestioning self-humiliation, utter submission, trust and belief against yourself and against the whole world, giving up your whole heart and soul to the smiter, as I did. Some people say that Estella is Ellen Ternan. I think that Miss Havisham is Dickens himself. He died in 1870. He described himself to his great friend John Forster as a misplaced and mismarried man, always, as it were, playing hide and seek with the world.
and never finding what fortune seems to have hidden when he was born. I'd like to leave you with his tenderest portrait, Miss Flite from Bleak House. Miss Flite is a crazy little old lady who goes every single day to the High Court of Chancery, awaiting a judgment on her inheritance, a judgment that may never come. I have lived here many years. I pass my days in court, my evenings and my nights here. I find the nights long, for I sleep but little and think much. That is, of course, unavoidable, being in Chancery. I am sorry I cannot offer chocolate. I expect a judgment shortly, and shall then place my establishment on a superior footing. At present, I don't mind confessing, in strict confidence, that I sometimes find it difficult to keep up a genteel appearance. I have felt the cold here. I have felt something sharper than cold. It makes no matter. Pray excuse the introduction of such mean topics. Ah, my birds. I began to keep the little creatures with an object you will readily comprehend, with the intention of restoring them to liberty when my judgment should be given. They die in prison, though. Their lives, poor silly things, are so short in comparison with Chancery proceedings that one by one the whole collection has died, over and over again. But I expect a judgment shortly. My father expected a judgment. My brother, my sister, they all expected a judgment, the same that I expect. Yes, all dead, of course. But I must tell you a secret. I have added to my collection of birds 2 more. I call them the wards in Jarndyce. They are caged up with all the others, with hope, joy, youth, peace, rest, life, dust, ashes, waste, want, ruin, despair, madness, death, cunning, folly, words, wigs, rags, sheepskin, plunder, precedent, jargon, gammon, and spinach.
All of Dickens' women were played by Miriam Margolyes. She was accompanied at the piano by Michael Haslam. The production was directed for the theatre by Sonia Fraser and for radio by Enid Williams.